There was a philosopher who spent his entire life claiming that being born was a mistake. And yet, millions of people still read his ideas, not to find despair, but to find relief. How is that possible? How can someone so deeply pessimistic bring peace to those who listen? Tonight, we're going to explore the mind of Arthur Schopenhauer slowly and without rushing, until you understand why he believed that life is suffering, and why that idea, strangely enough, might actually help you fall asleep in peace. Relax. Close your eyes if you'd like. I'll take it from here. Before we dive into his philosophy, it's worth understanding the world he was born into. It was the late 18th century, a Europe undergoing dramatic transformation, caught between revolutions, the Napoleonic Wars, and the rise of entirely new ways of thinking about human nature. Amid this turbulent backdrop, a boy was born who would unknowingly develop one of the most profound and uncompromising visions of human existence ever written. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in the bustling port city of Danzig. He was the son of a wealthy merchant and a well-known writer named Johannes Schopenhauer. From an early age, he traveled across Europe. He saw magnificent palaces. He witnessed poverty. He witnessed war. That striking contrast between material comfort and the chaos surrounding it shaped his view of the world while he was still very young. His father was a practical businessman who dreamed of turning his son into a capable heir, someone who would expand the family's fortune through international trade. He took the boy on business trips, introducing him to ports, offices, negotiations, and commercial contracts. But Schopenhauer felt an emptiness within that world of numbers and profits. Something about it deeply disturbed him, even though he couldn't yet put it into words. As he watched the adults around him, all he saw was an endless cycle with no real meaning. Work, accumulate wealth, rest, then wake up and do it all over again. He longed to understand something far more fundamental. Why do we exist? And why does existing always seem to involve suffering? That question, still vague during childhood, grew alongside him until it became the central obsession of his entire adult life. When his father died under circumstances that were never fully explained, possibly by suicide, although it was never officially confirmed, Schopenhauer finally gained the financial freedom to pursue his own path. He used his inheritance to devote himself entirely to the study of philosophy, abandoning any plans for a commercial career once and for all. His relationship with his mother, however, was deeply strained. Johanna was a successful author, admired in the literary salons of her time, and surrounded by influential figures, including Goethe himself. But mother and son could not have been more different. She was outgoing, optimistic, and sociable. He was introspective, reserved, and deeply melancholic. Over the years, their arguments became increasingly bitter until they eventually reached a breaking point. After one particularly explosive confrontation, Johanna cut him out of her life completely, and the two never truly reconciled. That painful family estrangement, combined with his naturally solitary personality, shaped much of the isolation that would define the rest of Schopenhauer's life. He immersed himself in philosophy, science, and Eastern literature, an unusual pursuit for a European thinker of his time. He became one of the first Western philosophers to seriously study ancient Indian texts, including the Upanishads and Hindu philosophy. That Eastern influence would become essential in shaping a worldview unlike almost anything being taught in Europe at the time. The central question driving all of his work sounded simple, but proved almost impossible to answer. What truly moves human beings? Not reason, as many philosophers, especially followers of Kant and Hegel, believed. Schopenhauer saw something far more primitive, something instinctive and deeply rooted beneath every human decision. He called this force the will, a blind, unconscious force with no ultimate purpose, an endless drive that pushes every living creature to keep wanting, forever chasing something just beyond its reach, never finding lasting satisfaction. Think about it for a moment. You finally achieve something you've wanted for years. For a brief instant, you feel relief, maybe even happiness, but almost immediately, another desire takes its place. The cycle never stops. According to Schopenhauer, this is exactly what condemns us to suffer. He argued that life swings endlessly between two uncomfortable states: desire, which causes pain because it has not yet been fulfilled, and boredom, which appears the moment a desire has finally been satisfied and nothing remains to pursue. Do you see the problem? According to him, true rest doesn't exist. We simply alternate between longing for what we don't have and growing tired of what we've already obtained. To explain this idea, he often used ordinary examples from everyday life. Imagine someone who spends years dreaming of owning a home. They work tirelessly, save every dollar, sacrifice sleep, and postpone pleasures. Eventually, they buy the house. For a while, they're overwhelmed with joy. But only a few months later, that same house becomes ordinary. It fades into the background of daily life. Soon another desire appears, perhaps a new car, a bigger home, an exciting vacation, or another achievement waiting just beyond the horizon. According to Schopenhauer, this endless cycle isn't a personal flaw. It's simply how existence itself is structured, and it operates exactly as it was meant to, only in a remarkably cruel way. The first time many people hear this, they feel a heaviness settle in their chest. It sounds hopeless, but stay with me, because this story takes an unexpected turn. Schopenhauer didn't stop at identifying suffering. He devoted his life to searching for ways to escape the tyranny of the will, even if only for a few precious moments. And surprisingly, one of the answers he found was art. He believed that whenever we truly contemplate a painting, lose ourselves in music, or become completely absorbed in a great story, something extraordinary happens inside the mind. For those brief moments, we stop wanting. We stop calculating. We stop planning. We stop chasing the next thing. We simply exist, present, still, no longer dragged forward by the relentless machinery of desire. Among all the arts, Schopenhauer believed music was the purest form of escape. Unlike painting or literature, music doesn't imitate objects or describe the visible world. Instead, it gives direct expression to something much deeper, the emotions and forces moving within us, beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond judgment. Because of that, he believed music communicates directly with the essence of the will itself, without any intermediary. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. A piece of music reaches you so deeply that, for a few seconds, everything else disappears. Your worries fall silent. Time seems to pause. The outside world fades away. According to Schopenhauer, those rare moments are genuine peace, a temporary break from the endless cycle of wanting. But art wasn't his only answer. He also believed compassion offered another path out of suffering. In his view, much of human cruelty comes from the illusion that we are separate from one another, that your pain belongs only to you, and someone else's pain has nothing to do with your own. When that illusion dissolves, when you truly feel another person's suffering as if it were your own, compassion is born. And strangely enough, caring deeply about another person's pain also lightens the burden of your own existence. For Schopenhauer, compassion was the true foundation of morality, more important than religious commandments, more important than laws, more important than social expectations. Doing good wasn't about obeying rules. It was about genuinely recognizing yourself in the suffering of another human being. Schopenhauer spent much of his life in isolation. He had very few close friends and often found himself in bitter disputes with other philosophers of his time, especially George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose academic success irritated him immensely. Ironically, Schopenhauer never married and never had children. He had a few brief romantic relationships, but none of them lasted. Instead, he lived surrounded by books and accompanied by his loyal poodle, Atma, a Sanskrit word meaning universal soul. Yes, his most faithful companion was a dog whose name perfectly reflected his philosophy, the belief that every living being shares the same essential nature beneath the surface of existence. His daily life followed a strict routine. He took long walks every day. He read at fixed hours. He ate his meals at the same restaurant in Frankfurt, the city where he spent the final years of his life. It was an almost monastic existence, disciplined and entirely devoted to thought. For many years, however, the academic world paid almost no attention to his ideas. In 1818, he published his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation. Almost no one read it. Imagine dedicating your entire life to a revolutionary idea, writing with extraordinary clarity and conviction, only to be met with silence and indifference. That silence lasted for decades. Meanwhile, rival philosophers like Hegel enjoyed fame, prestigious university appointments, and countless admirers. Schopenhauer watched all of this with growing bitterness, convinced that his work was far superior, even if his contemporaries failed to recognize it. Only in the final years of his life, when he was already an old man, did public opinion finally begin to change. A younger generation of thinkers started reading his work seriously. Among them was Friedrich Nietzsche. As a young man, Nietzsche was profoundly influenced by Schopenhauer's writings, even though he would later reject many of his darker conclusions and develop his own philosophy partly in response to that pessimism. The composer Richard Wagner also openly acknowledged Schopenhauer's influence. His reflections on music and suffering became deeply woven into Wagner's operas, shaping some of the emotional intensity for which they are still famous today. Schopenhauer died in 1860. He was found alone in his apartment, seated at the breakfast table, most likely having passed away from natural causes related to heart failure. It was a quiet, undramatic death, perfectly consistent with the quiet, disciplined life he had always lived. And here we arrive at perhaps the most surprising part of his story. Despite his deeply pessimistic view of existence, his philosophy has not inspired despair in most of those who read it. Quite the opposite. Many people discover a profound sense of relief. How can that be? Because acknowledging that suffering is a natural part of life, instead of denying it or believing you're the only one who feels it, creates a strange but genuine sense of comfort. You stop fighting reality. Instead, you begin accepting that pain and desire are simply part of the human experience. And that acceptance, far from being an act of surrender, can become incredibly liberating. You stop blaming yourself for feeling constantly dissatisfied because you realize that dissatisfaction isn't a personal defect. It's part of the human condition itself. Think about how many times you've felt guilty for not being happy, even after achieving everything you once dreamed of. Schopenhauer would say that this dissatisfaction isn't evidence of personal failure. It's simply the will continuing to do what it has always done, to keep wanting. That is precisely why so many people turn to Schopenhauer's ideas late at night, just before going to sleep. Not because they want to sink into sadness, but because they finally stop fighting their anxious thoughts, accepting that longing, disappointment, and frustration are simply part of being human. Schopenhauer often illustrated this idea with the image of a pendulum. Life, he said, swings endlessly between pain and boredom, never coming to rest at the perfect center. Perhaps that's the true wisdom hidden within this often misunderstood philosopher. It's not about eliminating suffering altogether, because that's impossible. It's about discovering small moments of silence within the constant machinery of existence. Moments found through art, through compassion, or simply through the quiet acceptance of who we are. He also spoke about the importance of solitude, not forced isolation, but the kind of solitude that allows a person to become comfortable with themselves. According to Schopenhauer, learning to enjoy your own company, without constantly depending on the approval or validation of others, is one of the few genuine ways to reduce everyday suffering. That doesn't mean cutting yourself off from the world. It means building a calmer relationship with your own mind, no longer relying so heavily on external achievements to feel worthy or complete. Perhaps tonight, instead of struggling against your thoughts, you can simply observe them. Watch them without judging them. In much the same way Schopenhauer believed we should listen to music. Allow your thoughts to rise and fade like waves on the ocean, without trying to control every one of them. We live in a world obsessed with productivity, with constant achievement, with goals that never stop growing. More than 200 years ago, Schopenhauer seemed to anticipate exactly this kind of modern exhaustion, the feeling of running endlessly without ever arriving anywhere. Maybe that's why his ideas continue to be read, discussed, and shared today. Because the mechanism he described, the endless cycle of desire followed by dissatisfaction, hasn't disappeared. It remains just as powerful now as it was in the world he lived in. This is the story of Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who believed that life is suffering, yet paradoxically taught millions of people how to find moments of peace within that very suffering. So tonight, rest knowing that feeling dissatisfied doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It simply means you're human. And if this reflection brought you even a little sense of calm tonight, there's another video on the channel exploring the life of a different thinker who understood existence in a completely different way. It's the perfect companion if you'd like to continue relaxing, reflecting, and gently drifting off to sleep.